Just before Thanksgiving break, we covered on this show a remarkable dive into a very resonant, very relevant part of history. It was published by the influential legal site Lawfare, and it looked at what happened in Watergate when President Nixon was having improper contacts with a high-ranking Justice Department official, just as Watergate was playing out. The piece looked at how it is a criminal matter. It was treated as an impeachable offense for the president to be using inside information about a Justice Department investigation in order to plan his own defense. It was a provocative thing for Lawfare to publish that piece because of what it says implicitly about the current president now that he has picked somebody to oversee the Justice Department as a whole, and specifically the special counsel investigation into this president and his campaign. But it was also a really provocative piece because of who wrote it. That analysis is not directly about President Trump, never mentions the current president by name, but it explores Watergate history in such a way that people could see it pretty bluntly for themselves. And it was co-authored by the former general counsel of the FBI, James Baker, who was one of the people who former FBI Director James Comey confided in about his troubling interactions with President Trump when it came to President Trump pressuring him about the FBI's investigation into these matters. Since we had that question so incisively, implicitly, provocatively raised about what happens when a president gets information about an investigation into himself improperly, since then we've gotten information that the president has also a different source of information from inside the investigation, namely his convicted felon campaign chairman. The president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has confirmed the arrangement. And it's interesting enough now to focus on what that might mean for the criminal case against the president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. But what does it mean for the president? This feels like a momentous thing. Putting our finger on exactly what this means legally and in terms of the size of this scandal, I think involves some historical reckoning as well as some legal reckoning. Joining us now is Ben Wittes. He's editor-in-chief of Lawfare, which published that landmark piece. Mr. Wittes, thank you for making the trip to be here. Much appreciated.
Happy to be here.
So you published this piece from Mr. Baker, recently departed from the FBI as their counsel. And it did raise a very provocative allegory, even though he didn't explicitly spell that out. At least that's how I talked about it on TV. That's how I saw it. Is that how you saw it when you decided to publish it?
Look, I think nobody reasonable can read that article with an awareness of what's going on in the current world and not see some serious parallels. So let's tick through a couple. I actually wrote some down. Okay. Number one, the article details repeated White House DOJ communications, Justice Department communications on a matter at which the White House, the president himself, had an active personal interest. Number two, the article details using the Justice Department to gather intelligence, using these contacts to gather intelligence by the president about the state of the investigation. Number three, describes a senior DOJ official going to the White House and warning the president that one of his senior aides has a serious problem and is compromised. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Number four, the president protests to a senior Justice Department official. These are good guys. He
doesn't fire them.
And he doesn't want to fire them. He's really upset about that. Number five, it describes the Attorney General recusing. By the way, Nixon took that relatively well compared to Trump. Number six, he describes holding the FBI directorship over a senior Justice Department official as a sort of inducement to handle the investigation the way the president wants. That kind of sounds familiar too. And number seven, it describes the president looking and seeking from senior Justice Department officials to know whether they have developed adverse information about the president himself. And I think the reason this is a powerful article is that all seven of those items have direct parallels in the news of today and of the last 18 months. And so, I don't like the article is an article about history. It's an article about how Congress experienced that set of things. And by the way, they didn't look at it and say, We're not going to pay attention to what the president says. We're going to focus on what he does. We're going to ignore. We don't read the tweets. Not that Nixon tweeted. They said this is an unacceptable way for the president, who has taken an oath to preserve and protect the Constitution and has a duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. This is an unacceptable fashion for the president to engage with an investigation of, among other things, his White House and himself. And that is one of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon.
And that I want to be specific about that bottom line, because what happens with Nixon is that does end up being part of the articles of impeachment against him. But we now also know, in part because of some documents that were unsealed because of litigation that you were part of to get this stuff unsealed, we now know that this was not just a matter that Congress became interested in. These are all things that prosecutors, special prosecutor's office, gathered information about, put together as criminal evidence of criminal behavior by the presidents, and then referred it to Congress, who then put it forward in articles of impeachment. But they saw this as criminal behavior by the president that, aside from the question of whether or not the president could be indicted, this was a matter not just of congressional interest. It was a matter of the president being a felon.
Right. So this is, I think, a really important point, and it has immediate implications for the present day. We often throw around questions like, oh, did the president just obstruct justice? We talk in this language that refers to specific criminal statutes or categories of criminal statutes. Let's distinguish between impeding an investigation and the crime of obstruction of justice. And if you look at those Jaworski documents that you were just talking about, Jaworski's interested in the question, did the president commit a crime? Now, he eventually decides he's going to name him as an unindicted co-conspirator, not going to indict him while he's still in office. But his focus, he's a prosecutor, his focus is on criminal acts.
And he describes him as committing crimes.
Committing crimes. And he treats it entirely in a criminal context. When that information goes to Congress, their job is not to decide, did he commit crimes? Their job is to say, did he commit an offense that is unacceptable in a president who has taken an oath to preserve and protect the Constitution and who has a duty under the Constitution to take care that the laws are faithfully executed? That is a different question. And part of my point here is that the impeachment question is a different question than the criminal question. It is possible, of course, that you've done both. Right.
But the criminal investigation can produce the grounds for impeachment.
But the question Congress should be asking itself is not, did the president commit a crime in these interactions, say, with Paul Manafort? Because add to all this crazy stuff that has parallels with Watergate, what the president appears to have done, which was, we might say, collude with a felon, a convicted felon, to gather intelligence on federal prosecutors who work for the United States Department of Justice, which is to say, for him, his administration. We can ask the question, how does that interact with the criminal law? But the first and most important question to ask about that is that an acceptable thing for the president to do? Is it acceptable for the president to screw up his own investigation, his Justice Department's investigation, by doing that and then dangling a pardon in front of that person's face?
Ben Wittes is the editor-in-chief of Lawfare. Ben, thank you for being here. I feel like this is an important time, and clarity is priceless at this point. I really appreciate you helping us.
Good to see you.
Thanks. I've actually never missed a handshake before. Let's do it again. Very good.
Excellent.
Thanks. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.